Rama Eye Hospital, Malappuram, Kerala. It's indeed a big privilege to be lecturing in Muthuswami's platform, Professor Muthuswami's platform, and I thank Dr. Muhammad Sadiq for the opportunity. Well, as you all know, the topic is about refractive surgery, or it is more precisely complications of LASIK. So as you know, refractive surgery is not just about LASIK. You know that it was dealing with radial keratotomy in 1974. Then in 1981, the RK or photorefractive keratectomy came in. Then LASIK came in 1996. And now we are all talking about SMILE that came up in 2004. Then we realized that LASIK need not be just done with a blade. It can be the flap in LASIK need not be taken up with just a blade. We can use indeed a laser to open up a flap as well. And then we named it as femto LASIK. So coming back to PRK, we should know that theoretically it is actually a surface procedure wherein we are not raising a flap. We are indeed just debriding the epithelium using alcohol or hockey stick, whatever means mechanically. And then we are ablating the surface of the cornea. The only problem is it can land up with the haze, but now we have mitomycin to save that haze as well. And with regard to SMILE, it is not a flap being raised. It's more like a lenticule is being extracted within the corneal stroma. So when we discuss about complications, indeed actually with regard to LASIK, almost all the complications are mostly limited to this procedure. Why? Because see, in LASIK, what we are actually doing is we are using a microkeratome to raise a flap. In femto LASIK, as I said, we are indeed using a laser, which is more like a precise cut, and there is no sloping edge at the margins of the flap, and wherein we are using a femto laser to raise a flap. Ablation in both procedure, in LASIK as well as femto LASIK, is by using an excimer laser. So when we discuss about complications, if there is a problem in the ablation, in fact, you know that the only problem we can expect here is with regard to the refractive error, which by and large, if you are precise about everything, which is usually rare that we face up with. But flap-related complications are not so. Before that, what are we planning or what we are trying to do in LASIK? You know that there is a cornea in front, and when the light is getting focused onto the retina, it is a normal vision. What happens in myopia is the light gets focused in front of the retina, and as you know, in hypermetropia, it gets focused in front or behind the retina. So what we're trying to do in refractive procedure is, we know that if the light that is going in is, in fact, by making the cornea flat, we are diverging the light a little bit. So a light that should have been focused in front of the retina, because of the divergence, is in fact getting focused onto the retina. That's the simple principle behind myopic LASIK. Similarly, in hypermetropia, we are actually making the cornea more steep, or we are trying to make it more convex, to be more precise. So in myopia, we make the corneal surface, that is in fact only the 6.5 millimeters of the cornea is being flattened, and the flap that we are opening is around 8 millimeters or 8.5, around between 8.5 to 7.5 millimeters. And we ablate or flatten the corneal surface in between, that is usually around 6 to 6.5 millimeters. In hypermetrops, we make that a little more larger. So what I'm trying to tell here is, we open up a flap and then we flatten up the cornea. That's the only thing that we are doing in refractive procedure or in LASIK, to be more precise. So a complication is all related mainly to the flap that we open up here. And it is this 6.5 millimeter zone that we are trying to ablate. Complications pre-operatively and intraoperative complications are usually not asked in your exams. But for the sake of completion, we should know that if there is any pre-operative corneal pathology, you can expect flap-related complications. If the patient is having blepharitis, Meibomian dysfunctions, also we can expect complications. If the eye is too soft to deal with, or if the average K of the patient is more than 46, or if it's, let's say, it's a flatter cornea that we are dealing with, that's around 14 diopters. And also, we will have a hard time if we are dealing with an inseated eye, or the patient is tending to make the cornea or the lid more brighter. Coming to the intraoperative complications, if you have not lubricated the cornea much during the procedure, or if you're using a poor plate quality, some surgeons do use for multiple number of cases at the same plate. So in that case, it can get the blunt and you will have problems during your flap formation. Or during the cutting of the flap, the microkeratome malfunction because of some technical issues. Also, when you're dealing with a thin flap, why should we go for a thin flap? What does that mean? What is a normal flap thickness then? It's usually 130 microns. The flap that we make is usually 130 flap. But all that is, can we make the flap more thinner? Well, when do we have to go for that? That is actually depending upon residual stromal thickness. It is actually beyond the topic of discussion here. So I will not go into the details of that. So if we find that, to be make it more simpler, if we find that we are dealing with a thinner cornea and the patient tends to be having a higher refractive error, in that case, to get more residual corneal stroma, we tend to make the cornea more the flap more, try to make the cornea more thin, flap more thinner. So in that case, we may have to make the flap as thin as 90 microns also. So these flaps are little difficult to handle when you place them back in the procedure. Or let's say during the microkeratome functioning, initially we place a ring on the cornea to stabilize the plate. So that ring gets stabilized by creating a lot of suction. Vacuum is being created and it gets too tightly stuck to the eyeball. So during your puff, or when the microkeratome is moving front, when that suction is lost, the blade will not give us a smooth cut. It can give us an irregular flap. Also, when to be dealing with less complicated things, when you have some defects in the Bowman's membrane at the flap edges, like maybe a scar or already some dystrophic patients, we may have problems during the cutting. Or let's say when you are ablating, you have waited for a long time before the time between the flap being raised and the laser being fired has to be faster. Like the minimum time possible has to be given for that. So when you tend to have faced some technical issues during a procedure and you have to wait for a little longer time, exposure of the bed and the flap to the atmosphere, under surface of the atmosphere can cause complications later. If you're trying to correct a high refractive error, then you are going in more deeper into the corneal stroma. In such cases, when you are placing the flap back onto the cornea, you will have difficulties in handling the flap. Also, with regard to the usage of certain toxic agents, or like mitomycin C, or when you are some perfume that the patients have used can also cause problems. And all the more, the most dreaded thing that we are always fearing is infection that can occur during the procedure. Well, all this can result in certain complications of the flap. We call it by the name fancy recap, irregular thickness flap, buttonholing of the flap. Flap can get torn in between, incomplete flap. What does a free cap mean? Free cap means we know that in LASIK, what we do is we open up a flap, and this is where the hinge of the flap is. and then the ablated area that is in between the pupil as the center. As I said, this is usually 6.5, and the flap we raises between 7.5 to 8.5. Well, sometimes it happens that the blade is what is giving us this flap formation. Sometimes the microkeratome goes a little bit more forward because of the mistake in our calculation. So in such case, we have something called as a free flap. Free flap means it is easily floating around, or it is on the surface, remains on the surface without a hinge. Next is irregular thickness flap. That is with regard to the cross-sectional thickness. Uniformly, it will not be the same. Certain areas it will be too thin a flap, and certain areas it will be too thick a flap. In buttonholing, it so happens that the flap will just get cut at the center, and there will be a central hole as well. This is usually seen in a steeper corneas. A flap tear means it gets torn in between, exactly because the blade happened to have slipped its contact with the periphery, and somehow the blade goes in between and it gets torn, or it can also get torn if you have handled it in a difficult way. And thirdly, an incomplete flap. Incomplete flap means the blade did cut the corneal surface, but it stopped in midway. So it may have stopped it here, and you will be only able to raise the flap till here. It may cut it till here. That means it is midway, it has crossed the pupillary area. And sometimes the cut is complete on this side. It may not have reached only at this end. So that's about the pre-operative and intra-operative complications that we usually deal with. What's more important is in the second phase.
Okay, to conclude this, the first phase, I would like to ask one question to the participants. What is the best way to prevent a complication?
Good pre-op evaluation.
Okay. Any other takers? How was the audio? You could listen well, right? Any confusions, any problem in the audio part?
No, sir, it was clear.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, Vijaya. I want everyone to participate.
Choose the correct ring size according to the keratometric values.
Okay. Anybody else? Who's Dr. Wash?
Yeah, we shouldn't go blind. We should be very concentrative at the surgery.
Okay.
Based on the preoperative parameters, we should anticipate what are the complications that might occur, and we have to be watchful.
Okay, good. Okay, one more person. Logan.
Hi, I think yeah, the most important is that we need to anticipate what is the patient's expectation of the outcome.
Okay.
I think we need to determine preoperatively the refractive error and if it's stable, and then take the patient for surgery.
Okay, great. All these are right, but my question is precise here. It is the best way to prevent a complication. Okay, so it is actually this. As the screen says, like the best way to avoid a complication is, in fact, as my fellowship, my senior doctor, Dr. Srinivas Kera used to say, it is like best is to prevent a complication is not to do any surgery. What I in fact mean here is, see, when you are a surgeon, I know many of you are into many specialties here. So when we tend to do surgeries, yes, complications are something we anticipate. The only thing here is not to panic and go ahead and manage it in the best way possible. And if you have been trained well, or if you have a good knowledge about the area, the panicking is something that will stop everything. So Don't panic and give the best to the patient that you can. So having complications in any surgery is not a bad thing. The only thing is we should have that heart to manage it well. And with that, let me go to the other important part.
Okay, now moving on to the next phase. I would like to present it in a different way as case scenarios. So to begin with, in case number 1, we have a 23-year-old male. He has undergone LASIK 2 weeks back, and he is now complaining of blurring of vision in the right eye. The patient seems to be very unhappy after getting a good vision back. Now he is reporting that his vision has blurred out. We did a slit lamp examination, and this is what is being seen.
Yeah. So any takers for this? Anybody want to comment on what you're seeing here?
Flap wrinkling.
Okay, very good.
Macro striae
There's a striae.
Okay. Striae. Okay.
along with flap
So-
displacement.
Yeah, so there are two things here. I don't know how clear it is on your system. So there are two things actually you have to look at here. There is definitely a striae. So striae means you have a micro striae, somebody said that, and there is a macro striae. So here what you're actually seeing is more like a macro striae. I will tell you why. So you can see this. I hope it's visible to everyone. There are certain folds here that you can appreciate. Second thing I did mention was there is a flap displacement. It's displaced to this side. Why do I say so? It's because this is actually the flap and this is the host end. There is actually a gap here. So this is how the flap is moving and this is how the folds are. So you can easily say some impact has occurred from this end and has moved the flap towards one side. So there are two things to be recognized here, that there is a striae as well as there is a flap displacement. Now, what is the difference between a micro striae and macro striae? Can anybody volunteer? Anyone? Aarti, you want to give it a try?
Micro striae maybe that's only appreciated on the slit lamp.
On the?
Only appreciated on the slit lamp.
On the slit lamp, you mean, or?
Yeah, slit lamp. Yes.
Okay. Okay, fine. Dr. Aarti?
Sir, not sure, sir.
Fine. Okay. Okay. It's just as the name suggests. It's micro, the other one is macro. So macro is going to be bigger. Bigger means you can easily appreciate a striae in macro striae. You can easily see it when you're looking through a slit lamp. Micro striae is going to be more finer and little more smaller, even only by looking at a retro reflex from the retinal red reflex, you will be able to make out the striae. It will be that fine. You will have a doubt whether there is a striae or not. So that's the main difference. Another thing, if you have in doubt, is you can just stain the patient. If it is a macro striae, in between the troughs and crufts, these stain will get pulled up. These between those gaps, the stains will get pulled up. So then you are sure, okay, that means this is a micro striae I'm dealing with. It's not a micro striae. Micro striae is something that will disappear on its own. You don't need a management here. Micro will disappear maybe in a month's time, it will just wave off. But macro striae is something you will have to manage. Okay, any doubts with regard to micro striae and macro striae? I hope it's clear.
Yes, sir, it's clear.
Yeah, great.
What do you think? As you rightly mentioned, there are a lot of lines on Talking about striae are of two types. There is a micro striae and macro. Actually, say these are large striae, so this has to be the macro. Here is you can see that the flap is displaced from its margin. That has the other reasons during the intraoperative, it could be because the flap was not properly placed, or the patient has had a high refractive error, due to which we had to do a deep photo ablation. So the opposition between the flap and the corneal stroma wouldn't have been that smooth. Post-operative causes could be after LASIK, which is the most common reason for a flap dislocation. Also, maybe because of severe dryness or some other entity, the patient may have sustained an epithelial defect that later on may have resulted in a flap dislocation. How do we deal with this? So here the protocol. First, we have to know that the epithelium has already grown back onto the flap, and the junction of the flap has been covered with epithelium that has grown from the limbal stem cells. So first, we have to debride all the epithelium involving the margin or the junction of the flap. So we use alcohol to do that. We dilute the alcohol, absolute alcohol, and debride up smoothly all the epithelium that is surrounding the flap. Then we give a thorough wash. We ensure that the flap is smoothly raisable, and the epithelium is removed from the surface. And then we instill distilled water. And finally, we iron the corneal flap. Next case is a little more interesting. This patient is a 30-year-old female, and she had undergone LASIK 10 years ago. And recently, she had a trauma with a stroke a few years after LASIK while drinking cold drink. And she had a displacement of the flap, and later the surgeon had repositioned the flap from elsewhere, and she was doing fine for so many years. But then of late, she is complaining of blurred vision and nighttime glare in the eye that was traumatized a few years back, since 6 months. On examination, this is what was seen. What do you think this is?
Yeah. Any takers? Any takers for this?
It's epithelial ingrowth.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Any other suggestions? Anyone thinks this is an infection, or may I know your name?
Sir, Aarti.
Yeah, Aarti. Yeah. So why do you think this is not an infection?
So the history is of 6 months. Patient doesn't
Okay.
have any complaint of pain or redness, watering, and the eye also looks relatively quiet.
Exactly. So the eye looks very quiet. That is the main thing here. If it was an ulcer or an infection, definitely you expect the eye to be more reddish. So there are certain islands of changes that you see here. So as you can see here, why is this an epithelial ingrowth? What is a common site of epithelial ingrowth? Aarti, can you just contribute a little more in?
Sir, I am not sure, but it is mid-peripheral region.
Okay, one thing about this epithelial ingrowth is usually, see, you know where the flap should be. The flap should have been, maybe, let's say if this is the right eye, I have made a nasal hinge here, and I have elevated it from this side up. So if there was, if this would have been an epithelial ingrowth, the most common site of an epithelial ingrowth is usually at this margins of my flap. But that is not so here in this case. Here it is more from the central part. So there is high possibility that we may mistake this for a infection, because it's nothing related to the margin of the flap that was made earlier. So that is the highlight of this particular case. So what would have happened here? So see, when going into a little more magnified view of this patient, you can see that the source of epithelial ingrowth is mainly from this area. It has just started and it has gone all the way around to the superior part. So this is the blue filter position, and see, this is where the round appearance here. Here there was a defect. Can you tell me how did that defect occur?
So because of the his trauma with the straw.
Yeah, so you remember the patient did complain of a history of trauma with a straw. So this is that area of defect that had occurred on the flap. So this was a full thickness injury that opened up a part of the flap, which by all means the epithelium found that gap and it started growing in under the flap area. So that's how this epithelial ingrowth has come in. So as you can see it clearly here, this is where the defect is, and this is how the epithelium has grown in. So you can we can do an anterior segment OCT and this check how big the epithelial ingrowth is under the flap. So just to be more clear here, what you should be knowing is epithelial ingrowth. Usually in exams you may be given a case wherein it is very much closer to the epithelial flap. But these cases also you should keep in mind when you are seeing certain infiltrate kind of an appearances at the center of the cornea in a post-LASIK patient, but the eye looks very white or there is no signs of an infection here, then you can think in terms of an epithelial ingrowth, especially when there is a trauma being informed in a patient who has undergone LASIK. So to come into the detail of epithelial ingrowth, you should know that these are isolated nests of cells that, as I said, is usually appearing at the margin of where I have made the flap. And later on, sometimes it just disappears on its own or it just stays on. But the problem actually occurs if it goes and starts involving the visual axis. That is, if it starts growing from the periphery and starts coming towards the center, that is where the pupil will get involved, or the pupillary area or the treated area is going to get involved. Then the problem with the patient arises. So when we are doing a topography also, we can see that there are irregularities. So what risk factors should we be keeping in mind to prevent a case of an epithelial ingrowth is, when we are placing the flap back after a LASIK, we have to ensure that there is no epithelial defect that I have left behind. Maybe when I had used the keratome, it may have occurred that it may have cut part of the flap away. So we have to be very sure that that particular area is very much opposed back into the stroma. And also flap adhesion is very, very important, because the epithelium should not find an alternative way other than growing over the flap. It should have no way by which it should be growing under the flap. And also, if you have had a perforation, or when you have done the surgery, when you're doing the microkeratome, for some reason it got perforated, the corneal flap during a trauma, or while during the procedure LASIK itself, you happen to be operating on a steeper cornea and the buttonholing of the microkeratome of the flap has occurred. In these cases, it's very unlikely that we should not proceed. We should not proceed with the LASIK. We should say a no to the procedure. We should stop it, because there is high chance that an epithelial ingrowth can happen in that case. In free cap, we can proceed with the LASIK here, but there are certain things that you have to keep in mind, which we'll be dealing with in the management of LASIK complications later. Also, we should keep in mind about the other disorders of the patient. That is, if the patient is already having a basement membrane dystrophy, then we should be apprehending that this may occur later on. The epithelial ingrowth can happen later on. So this patient should be kept on a constant follow-up, because if the epithelial ingrowth is in the periphery, patients will never complain. They will only come to you later. So if you already know these patients are having a possibility of getting an epithelial ingrowth, ensure that they come and see you maybe probably every 3 or 6 months. And post-operative, if the patient have had an epithelial defect, has come to you back again after the LASIK, maybe 3 or 4 months later on, saying that there was an injury with nail or fingernails and there was an epithelial defect, these patients should also be kept under scrutiny. And if the patient is already having some rheumatic causes for inflammation, or maybe during the sleep, within a week after the LASIK, the patient has rubbed the eye and there was some flap slippage post-operatively, these patients should be under the scanner to apprehend or look for a case of epithelial ingrowth. Now, how can the epithelial ingrowth be managed? Logan?
Sir, if it is not, can I answer?
Yeah, please go on.
Okay, so if in case it is not affecting the vision, it is away from the visual axis, then we can just leave it as it is, and
Yes.
it may resolve of its own with time.
Yeah. Let's say it has infiltrated, come to the paracentral area, or it has come into the visual axis, then what can be done?
Can we scrap? I think we can lift the flap and scrap and attach back.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that you have to go in and treat. This cannot be resolved with medication. That is the first take-home message here. Epithelial ingrowth, if has to be treated, that means if it is not in the periphery, it has come in towards the center, it's in the paracentral area, or it is involving the visual axis, means we have to intervene. Now, as you all know, we have to first lift the flap, just like Logan said. So, and another thing to remember here is lifting a flap in a post-LASIK patient. As I said just in the previous case, the epithelium has already grown over the flap margin here. So we have to make sure that I debride all the epithelium that has grown over the flap. Just like we managed the case of microstriae, we have to first debride all the epithelium that has grown over the flap. Then once that is done, we can lift the flap easily, and you can use a number 15 blade. That is important. Number 15, it's not 11. 11 will damage the flap. We have to use that is having a blunt end. With that blunt end, we can scrape off all the epithelial ingrowth that has grown over the stroma as well as the corneal flap, and then replace the flap back again, and ensure make that the adhesion this time on the flap margins, all the flap margins are well closely opposed to the margins well, because now we don't want another gap. Now, any doubt with regard to this patient? We know there is already a defect here. How do you think that can be managed?
So in initial post-op days, we may be putting a bandage contact lens.
Agreed. That's the best way out. When you suspect that if this defect is going to give you any problem, you can always think of giving a long-standing BCL. Maybe you can give it for a month, or there is no harm in giving it for 3 months. That's the best way, because that will at least assure that the flap is very much closely opposed to the stroma. And once the epithelium has easily grown over the defect area, then we are safe. There is no way that now the epithelium is going to find another way right under the flap. So at least until you are very sure that the epithelium has easily covered up that defect by growing from the limbal stem cell areas, then you can remove the bandage contact lens. Let's say that bandage contact lens doesn't seem to be working, or you did try it, but again you found that the BCL is not effective, the epithelial ingrowth is happening back again. What will be your next option?
Amniotic membrane grafting?
No.
Can we redo again? Maybe we can try some alcohol or MMC.
Okay, and we are repositioning the flap back again. What can we do with this defect? we know that BCL doesn't seem to be working. For some reason, let's say this was a high refractive error that was corrected, or this is a steep cornea. So because of these reasons, the flap is not able to oppose well to the stromal bed. So in that case, okay, we have an option of doing an YAG capsulotomy, YAG laser, I would say, YAG laser at these areas. We can artificially create a scar and ensure that this margin is getting opposed. Another way would be, some also suggest is stromal punctures. You know, we make it with a 26 gauge needle and we puncture the areas all around the defect. And some also advocate in, if it is too large a defect to be handled, then we can also think of suturing it. Here, vision is would be a problem if you suture it. All the other measures, if it is in the paracentral or in the peripheral areas, the vision may not be much affected. But when you're suturing it, there are chances that it will cause some problems, especially if it's in the paracentral areas. So suturing would be your last option. But you should know that other than placing the BCL, we can think of using a YAG laser, creating an artificial scar. You can use a 26 gauge needle to do the stromal puncture, or you can I'll finally think of suturing the defect. So coming to the modifiable risk factors of epithelial ingrowth, you should know that it is more likely to be seen in a microkeratome LASIK rather than femto-LASIK. Why? Because if you talk about the flap edge that I am elevating in a case of femto-LASIK, it is the cut area will be more vertical in femto-LASIK. If it is microkeratome, you know that it is going to be a sloppy edge. So that is where the flap is being lifted. So there is a possibility for the epithelium to grow under the flap. Give me just a second, please. ഒരു conference നടക്കുകയാണ്. Okay, I wanted to speak to you, but inshallah, maybe later. Okay, so. Okay, sorry guys. So that is the reason. I hope it's clear. In femto-LASIK, the cut edge will be very sharp between the flap as well as the host side. But in microkeratome, it's going to be a little sloppy. So it's easy for the epithelium to grow under the flap. Unlike in femto-LASIK, where it is going to be a little difficult for the epithelium to grow under the flap. Other than that, there are a lot of other complications or case scenarios wherein you may find, but from the exam point of view, I don't think much of the others are of importance. Maybe a dislocation of the flap would be something that we already discussed, that can also result in a epithelial ingrowth. Non-modifiable risk factor is something that is not in our hand. It is more likely to be seen in hypermetropes rather than myopes. Otherwise, if the patient is having some other systemic disease, there is a possibility of an epithelial ingrowth here. Now, just like Aarti said, when should we be thinking of treating it? See, as she said, if it is localized to the periphery, this patient is looking towards the nasal side. So if this is the flap margin, and if it is very much localized to the periphery, we won't be treating it. But let's say if it is in this way, it is very much close to the visual axis, or it's in the paracentral area, these kinds of epithelial ingrowths will have to be taken up and treated. Now, this is another important classification you should be knowing about when we're discussing epithelial ingrowth. It's not at all complicated. These are the names behind the classification. The only thing you have to remember here is the number 2 millimeters. If the epithelial ingrowth is limited to the edge of the flap by 2 millimeters, we don't go ahead with the treatment. But let's say if it is progressing, it wasn't 2 millimeters, and towards the edges, it's progressing all the way around that margin along the flap, we need not treat it as an urgent treatment. We can wait for 2 to 3 weeks and then decide whether to intervene or not. So here, progressing would be the thing you have to look at. How fast is it progressing? Next thing is grade 3. This is the most important. This is a question that they can ask in exam. When do you approach a case of epithelial ingrowth? Well, here you have to say that when it is in grade 3. What do I mean by grade 3? Grade 3 means if it is more than 2 millimeters from the flap edge and it is progressing and it is going to involve the visual axis, it is going right into the pupillary area, then this will definitely require an urgent treatment. And very rarely is it going to go into stage 4, but that is the aggressive growth stance and it is a very fast growing and it will threaten the visual axis. That is grade 4. So just know that grade 3 and grade 4 are the things wherein we intervene and treat. The others are limited to 2 millimeters of the flap edge, wherein grade 2 is showing progress, whereas grade 1 is not showing. And one thing to be remembered here is the term, maybe you may be asked what is PLEI. PLEI. Anybody? Logan, you want to try? What is PLEI?
Oh, sorry, I really don't know.
Okay. Aarti?
EI is epithelial ingrowth.
Correct. Okay. How did it come? After what procedure?
So is it the laser?
LASIK.
Post-LASIK epithelial ingrowth.
So it is post-LASIK epithelial ingrowth. This is how they usually term it as. They can ask you what is PLEI. So it is post-LASIK epithelial ingrowth. Okay, any doubts with regard to striae or epithelial ingrowth? I hope it's clear. You guys need some rest. You want to take some break? Sadiq sir, Muthuswamy sir, you would like to contribute something?
You see, when we learn to answer in this situation, okay?
Yes. Yes.
And if you do not know, there are two people who are participating very actively,
Yes.
Logan and Aarti.
Yes. Yes.
So Logan was answering quite well.
Yes.
When he didn't know, he said, I do not know. In the
Yes.
exam, it's very important.
Yes. Yes.
There's no way you can guess anything in the exam. If you know, you tell the examiner, you continue.
Yes.
Okay? But don't guess. If you do not know, the chances are you ask the study, he will tell you. The examiner will help you. He will try to take you to a direction. The moment you start guessing and trying to be too smart, you are going to lose the way. Okay? Be careful with that.
Yes.
Okay?
Yep.
Now, in whatever study has told you, you must try to pick the pulse. What is the importance? The 2 millimeters distance.
Yes.
To me, it struck me most. If you want to carry a message, carry that with
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
you. That's the purpose of this course.
Yes.
Okay? And there are a lot of people who are keeping quiet. If you want to make a mistake, please make a mistake here.
Yes.
You can make any mistake. You can even say, when I was undergraduate, when my professor asked about swollen tummy, a student said pregnancy in a man. My professor said, if you realize this, you will not make this mistake throughout your life. Make your mistakes here, I'm telling you. However gross a mistake, you make it here. Sometimes you think that you know certain things very firmly, but you must be sure that what you know firmly is correct. Okay? So if you listen to these lectures, it was very clear in whatever he said. I have absolutely no experience as far as practice. I'm not exaggerating. I too learned something.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Thank
but
you.
For me,
Thanks a lot.
whether I've learned anything or not is of no use. So it's for Vijay. Okay?
Okay, sir.
For the rest of you, do not here, whenever you have the Zoom meeting, do not hesitate to tell what you want. And number two, this is a venue for you to ask questions. If any doubts, please ask. Let me see how many of you are asking questions. You must don't ask questions for the sake of asking, please. The examiner can find out how intelligent you are by the question you ask.
Yes.
Understand? Don't ask questions for the sake of asking. Ask appropriate, pertinent questions. It's very important. Okay? Continue, sir. Continue. You are doing very well.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Get Swadik to ask 2 questions which he would ask in the exam.
Sadiq sir?
Can you get to Sadiq again? Yeah.
I think he is traveling, if I'm not wrong.
I know. You can get him.
Yes.
But I can tell you most of the questions that you ask are questions that can be asked in the exam. No two.
Exactly. Yes. Sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's any doubt, any of you, please ask.
Deepthi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any doubts from your side? You're fine?
Yes, sir. Actually, the second case that we had discussed, I wanted to know if I could describe it and
Yeah.
that if it's the right way of describing, sir.
You may. I'll show you the picture back again.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In exam, this is going to be the picture they may give you.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Deepthi, you can explain. Yeah.
This is anterior segment slit lamp picture of a post-LASIK patient showing.
How did you make out it's post-LASIK? Unless here, the topic is post-LASIK,
Okay.
but any other clues in the eye is telling you this is post-LASIK?
Sir, not in this picture, but in the other picture, we could see the incision.
Agree. Okay. So let's say if this was the picture that is given, and if let's say this is the picture that's given,
Okay.
you may not be able to conclude that this is a LASIK patient. So you can usually it's best to mention what you're sure about. Maybe from this picture. Give it a try.
Yes, sir. So anterior segment slit lamp picture showing subepithelial islands, most probably an epithelial ingrowth. I would like to look for any other site of incision.
Great. Yeah.
Either
or you can. That's how you can put it. I would like to look for a flap margin of the for post-LASIK to conclude whether this is a post-LASIK epithelial ingrowth.
Okay.
So whatever you're sure about, you can mention first. Maybe it's not evident from this photo, I know, but you should try to say whether any clues whether this is the right eye or left eye. You can try to look at that, and then whatever you're sure about, you can say. And one thing most important is you have to say what type of illumination has been used in slit lamp here.
Okay. So this is a parallelopipe.
Yeah, or a slit view. Slit view.
Okay.
It's not diffuse. Usually the two pictures they give you is either a diffuse photo, or that is you can say it's a diffuse illumination of the right eye or the left eye showing so and so. So anterior segment picture, as you rightly said. So similarly, in this picture, that slit is very much looking at you. So you have to mention something about that in your description about the picture here. Otherwise, you can say it is it has to be most probably a case of an epithelial ingrowth. I would like to confirm my finding or look at a traumatized site, or I would like to search for some flap margins to conclude whether this is post-LASIK or not. Okay.
Okay, here I want to stop you a little.
Yes, sir.
All of you have been listening to the questions that Saji is asking. What are the questions you can ask for? You see, whatever questions you are saying, ask for, are pertinent to coming to your diagnosis, to your management.
Yeah.
You see, the questions that you ask in the examination must be intelligent questions. It must be a reason.
Yes.
Never ask a question for which you cannot give an answer.
Yes.
Okay?
Yep.
So continue, Saji. Continue.
Yes. Yes. Another thing, Deepthi, you can say is what is the size of that area of lesion that you see. You can say it is circular, located with central areas of clearing. That is not affecting the central pupillary area. It is restricted to the margins of the pupil with a thickness of around maybe 2 to 3 millimeters towards the paracentral area. That would give a good picture about the lesion to somebody who has not seen this picture. So when we're describing it, we can try to describe it in that detail. So you can mention about the size, you can mention about the shape of the lesion, however you're seeing, and you can say that I suspect that this has to be a subepithelial lesion, because for that also a photo is a 2D picture. To say whether this is subepithelial subflap or location, is you will need the 3D appreciation, that is a direct view of the patient. I hope it's clear. You're fine with it, Deepti?
Yes, sir. Sir, just another doubt.
Yeah.
Can we also mention that I would also like to do staining to look for any
No harm.
epithelial defect or pooling?
Yeah, you can. There is no harm. That they may ask you.
Just
Yes,
would
sir.
you in your practice do that? Would you understand? Would you do that in your practice?
So not at this stage, because I already know it's a subepithelial defect.
Don't ask the question.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
You see, in your practice, in the examination, the examiner wants to know what you would do. What surgery has done is not, surgery is not going to pass the exam again. Understand?
Yes, sir.
When you are going to ask the question,
okay, sir.
they want to know. You see, when you in the examination, the most important thing is how you treat your patient. It's very important. So when you just asked him, would you stay in the patient? In your practice, would you stay in the patient? Okay. In your practice, if you think you stay in your patient, you can ask the question.
Yes.
Okay. You know for sure in your practice you might not stay in the patient. Don't ask. This is a doubt to the examiner. You see, these are all examination tricks and techniques. Okay.
Yes.
Study. Please continue.
Yes.
Please continue.
Yes. Sir. Yeah. So I think we'll go to the next case. Yeah. Now this is case number 3. This patient was 27-year-old and he had undergone LASIK for a power of minus 1.25 diopter. It's very small refractive error to deal with, and his main aim here was to get into a Navy because 6/6 vision is mandatory for these candidates. So he was very happy, but the problem was right on day 6 he started having diminution of vision, and the primary surgeon, he was operated from elsewhere, they had given him antibiotics, but he did not respond to it, and he was referred to the surgeon on day 9. So the day of presentation of the patient is on day 9, and the patient was very furious because he couldn't attend the interview for the Navy examination. And on presentation, his vision in the right eye was 2/80, the left eye was normal. And what was seen on slit lamp was this. Can Anjali take up? Participants. Yeah, Aishwarya. Can you tell me what are you seeing?
So is it an infiltrate?
Okay. Rather than saying, is it an infiltrate? Actually, please don't ask the examiner, is this an infiltrate? Okay. You have to be confident in what you are seeing. It is very much highlighted with the green arrows there, what you are supposed to be looking at. So you can just read that picture. What are you seeing? Just like Deepti was trying to explain the other lesion. Can you just give it a try here?
So this is a slit view. So this is a slit view of a post-LASIK patient.
Yeah. Okay. You can start it like this is an anterior segment picture of, is it right eye or left eye? It's not evident from this picture, I agree. But you can always start. This is an anterior segment picture. This is a posterior segment picture of the right eye or left eye in slit view of slit lamp. And I appreciate a so-and-so. Okay, go on. What are you seeing?
So this is an anterior segment picture of showing the slit view of which eye it is not clear, and most probably it's showing a plaque, endothelial plaque.
Okay. Why do you say it's endothelial?
The level of the plaque, I think it's in the endothelium from the picture.
Okay. It would be difficult to appreciate it in a 2D picture, but okay. I'm telling you this is in the interface. Now I've told you, I'm the examiner. I'm telling you this is a post-LASIK patient, and whatever you're seeing is in the interface. That is the area between the flap and the stromal bed. So this problem you're seeing is in the interface. Okay.
I'm not sure, sir.
Okay. Are you seeing anything in the circumcorneal area? Any clues you are able to pick up, especially in the superior part?
Eye is it a little? Eye is a little chemo, sir.
Yeah, or the vessels, blood vessels. Can you see here in the superior part? It's coming all around. Here it's not very clear. I agree, but in superiorly, I think it's very much evident. You can see a lot of congestion in the superior area.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this can't be definitely an epithelial ingrowth here. So this was something Aarti was discussing earlier. So this should be an infection, or this is an infective infiltrate you are looking at. That's because of the congestion is the clue for you here. So how can you just highlight upon how would you like to manage this patient now? Give it a try. It could be anything. I don't mind whatever you're saying. Just give it a try.
So antibiotics.
Okay. You don't want to come to a final diagnosis here?
Yeah. First of all, I would counsel the patient regarding this finding, and I would explain to the patient that currently patient having infective condition, and probably the previous doctor already started antibiotics, but unfortunately is still not resolving. So I would counsel patient for rescrapping and then start the antibiotic based on the sensitivity.
Yeah, that's exactly that's rightly said. So this is what I was waiting for as an examiner. I wanted this from you guys. So Aishwarya, this we are talking about scraping here.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So any difference in the scraping here? What do you use? How will you scrape this patient?
I think first we have to lift the flap and then we have to scrape the
exactly
foci.
So see, this is what the answer has to be. There is a flap here. Just going blindly, just in case of an infective keratitis, or just like we manage a case of corneal ulcer in other situations, here just by scraping the surface with a blade, number 15 is what we use. By just scraping on the surface of this will not yield you any result. Your report will be sterile, or there is no growth, no organisms are found here. So here the thing to be cracked here is you have to say that, sir, in a case of post-LASIK infiltrates, it's mandatory that we will have to lift the flap, then do the scraping, then you will definitely find something. You will get an organism, it may be in the form of bacteria, or it may be in the form of fungus, and that's how then you proceed up with your treatment. So in this patient, as your name, please. Doctor, your name, please. The person who commented about the raising the flap.
Sorry, Dr. Vash.
Yeah, Dr. Vash. Okay. You're from, sir?
I am working in the Muscat.
Muscat. Okay, sir. Okay. So that's exactly what we were waiting for. So now see, so we have to, and as I said again, lifting the flap in any case of LASIK patient, post-LASIK patient, is epithelium is always a hindrance. So we have to debride the epithelium all over the flap margins, and then we go under the flap and we raise it, and then by using a number 15 blade, we take the patient up for a smear, and then we do the culture. And in this patient, it turned out to be a filamentous fungi that came up in the KOH mount. Can anybody contribute on what all the culture medias we use, or how do we do a smearing in infective keratitis? What are the two things?
Gram stain,
gram stain, and that is for
stain.
bacteria, and KOH mount is for the fungus. Detail we may discuss it during the infectious keratitis topics. Okay, these are the two things. So we found a growth in the KOH mount. And also when we had lifted the flap, we did give a interface wash of the 1% voriconazole. And the patient was treated with 1 hourly voriconazole, and to fight the photophobia, hometropin was also given. And it started resolving, and it cleared up easily. So these are the few key things you should be thinking about when they show you a case of post-LASIK infiltrates. Any doubts here?
Sir, how we come to know that this is a fungal?
We did the smear and we grew it in the Sabrostrix agar, the fungi. Immediately, we can just wait, we can lift the flap, we send it to the lab, microbiologist will immediately call us and let us know this is mostly fungal, or they did a smear and told us these are filamentous fungi. So, and inadvertently, right from the appearance of the infiltrates, we are quite evident, we are usually sure this could be fungus. So we do give the patient a wash with voriconazole, or we can also think of giving a wash with vancomycin drops also. So it's more like an empirical treatment. If you have the facility in the hospital, like we have it here, the microbiologist can immediately call us. Maybe it maximum takes around 30 seconds for them to give us the information back again. Once the smear reaches the lab, we can get the information in 30 seconds. So we wait until then, and then we ensure that the interface is also washed with the required antifungal or antibacterial. And then we reposition the flap. So here the catch here is we have to lift the flap and ask for a smear rather than blindly going and scraping up on the surface of the flap. Okay, hope it's clear.
It's clear, sir.
Yeah. Now this is the next patient. Now this is during my fellowship back in Chennai. This was a patient we had to see. So here, this patient is a 26-year-old male. He had undergone LASIK for -4 diopters, and within 3 weeks, it was his marriage. And he had a good vision on day 1, and then it started decreasing on day 3 by watering pain and edema. And he was treated with all antifungal drugs as well as antibiotics, but it worsened. And the vision was counting fingers close to face. That means you are looking at an even more dangerous infective post-LASIK infection here. The first case was the simplest version. Here it is in a little more advanced stage. So what is something we have to keep in mind here is just by lifting the flap, sending the patient for a smear, growing the getting the culture report, and starting the patient on topical antifungals, there is something more we will have to do here. That is flap amputation. So in advanced cases of post-LASIK infections, we can think of something called as a flap amputation. That is, we are cutting off the flap. We can just cut this off and remove it. Otherwise, when you are keeping it back again, you are preventing the penetration of the antifungal drugs onto the surface. So you can just cut this flap and remove it. I agree. A 0.5 or 0.75 diopters of refractive error can happen when I'm removing the flap, or it's usually minimal. It's never more than 0.5 usually. But the problem here is if I don't do that, I am thinking of doing a therapeutic keratoplasty later on. If it happens to have infiltrated into the stroma of the patient, the stromal bed, then I am in little more danger here. So then we'll have to replace the patient's cornea altogether by doing a therapeutic keratoplasty. So to prevent that from happening, we do think of doing a flap amputation if the patient has presented with an aggressive case of infective keratitis. So here that was actually topped with voriconazole, natamycin, and ketoconazole 200 milligram BD with cycloplegic drugs. And that did give good results. In 24 hours itself, the patient was feeling much better. And it went on, and the patient regained very good vision after the procedure. Any doubts so far with regard to this? One
this
thing I would like
case,
to, yes, sir.
yeah, so in this case,
Yes.
purely we will treat with the antifungal. We will not prescribe any antibiotic.
Yes, we do. We do support it, and if you ask me, I usually support it with the gatifloxacin drops as well. If it is fungal, we usually prefer to give natamycin, voriconazole 1%, and we support it with an antibiotic. We can give Vigamox, but the problem here is there is a big practice, like always everyone is using moxifloxacin. There are certain resistant strains to it. So from my side, I have an idea of starting the patients usually on a gatifloxacin instead as an antibiotic cover. Both works.
Fine.
Yeah. So one thing to be highlighted here is, see, an infection in a case of LASIK is very rare, but if it happens, it's a big nightmare. The articles are the incidence of an infection post LASIK is usually very mild compared to the other complications that we see after LASIK. It's less than 1.5%. And
can we
one thing, yeah.
Can we when we lift the flap, can we prophylactically put any antibiotics?
That's what I said. We can do a wash. We can do a wash with antifungals or an antibiotic. Like we make fortified antibiotics. We usually use vancomycin or cefotaxime. If you feel this is bacterial, you can give a wash with fortified antibiotics. We constitute it, like for intracameral injections, intrastromal injections, we constitute antibiotics and antifungals. In a similar manner, with those drops itself, you can fortify it, and you can give a wash with these kinds of antibiotic or antifungal. In this patient, we had given a wash with voriconazole, 1%.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking that when we are doing the LASIK, when you do the LASIK operatively, if prophylactically in every patient we give like or wash the flap with antibiotic and little bit wash the stroma also with antibiotics. Is it like recommended, or is it like doing safe so that we don't get such patients, because we don't know which patient will going to which patient will going to get infected post LASIK?
Yeah, I would have gone with, it's a very good question to ask. I would have gone with that if, let's say, the article I just showed you, with regard to this, if a case of infection that is seen after a case of LASIK was, let's say, maybe 20-30%, let's say if the number was huge, then a prophylaxis of antibiotics during the procedure is highly recommended. Now, why am I hesitating to do it if I am anticipating it even for that 1.5%? If you don't want me and you want me to instill, the problem here is the time I have in it is recommended that the moment you lift the flap and you do the ablation and you're going to replace it back again. So the time between these has to be the minimum possible to get the excellent results post LASIK. To get a 6/6 vision after your LASIK, the time you should spend while lifting the flap and doing the ablation and placing it back has to be the minimum possible. That's one reason why we don't recommend using these kinds of drops during the intraoperatively. Second thing is, when we are using this, we are actually entertaining the presence of particles, like in the form of maybe the film, the powdery materials. We may leave it behind in the interface. That may affect the patient's vision also here, because even if I instill some drops onto the surface, the last step before I place the flap back again is I'm going to do a thorough wash, because I don't want any of the burnt stroma. I have flattened up the cornea, so I don't want any of the stromal tissues to remain back there. So I make sure that I wash it thoroughly. I don't want any particles in that interface. I make sure it's crystal clear, and then I place back the flap again. So even if I tend to instill some antibiotic drops, the moment I wash it thoroughly, it's all going to go away. So the probability or what we are intending to do here will be of no use. So that's the main reason why we don't give any antibiotics intraoperatively in the interface. I hope it's clear.
Yes, thank you so much. And how much how much fluid you instill to wash, or how do you get sure that you have washed it very properly
Yeah, we
after
usually
laser?
have a 10 ml
Or-
syringe with us, and when we're like it's more like a clarity that you get. Okay, when the interface is almost clear. Usually, maybe maximum, if you ask me, would be a 10 ml syringe. Whatever saline or distilled water you have within it will do the job. Make sure that it's all thoroughly washed up. Okay.
And the minimum time you said to
Yeah.
laser it and to rejoin the flap back again.
Yeah.
Is there?
How
I
much?
mean, are
Time.
there any minutes or suggested?
No, no, no.
It's just
Not from an
okay.
exam point of view. There is no such thing to be remembered about.
As soon
It's
as
just
possible,
because
we have to.
as soon as possible would be the best answer you can give in the exam.
Okay.
Because see,
Thank
these
you.
are things you should not be doing it in a hurry, but it has to be
Yeah.
more precise. Your ablation has to be more centered. You have to make sure it's not being fired in the periphery. You have to make sure the laser is coming within the flap. All that is important. But you have to keep in your mind, you don't have to waste much time because it's going to dry up the bed. So then your results are going to change. So the moment you lift the flap, you have to make sure everything is ready. Your technician has to be set and fire. The ablation is over. It depends upon the refractive error also here. If you're treating a high power, it will take more time for the cornea to get ablated. The lesser the power, it is going to give you the correction in a lesser time.
Okay. Okay. And in how many days you think post LASIK there would not be a much problem in relifting the flap? Like suppose after 6 months or like few months, then it becomes a problem in relifting the flap again.
I didn't get your question. Sorry. I did not get your question.
I mean to say that relifting the flap, in how many days the surgeon will not have any problem in relifting the flap for any purpose. Like after 6 months, maybe the marks are not that much visible.
Your question is still not very clear.
It's lifelong. It's lifelong. Any time in the life you can lift it again.
Okay.
Like what sir is trying to say is we can lift it anytime. Like it's always there. That kind of area of demarcation is visible. If you are looking it straight in, it is possible to lift it back again anytime later on.
Okay.
But all these flap striae, displacement of the flap is something we usually see in the early months of the post-LASIK patient. But if it's a large trauma, like he was playing football or something heavy had hit his eye, then it does get displaced. But we can do the same procedures even years together, even years later.
Okay.
That interface is always there for us.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome. Okay, so now coming back to the flap related complications, we have covered up the striae, we have covered up the epithelial ingrowth, we have covered the interface infections. Now to go ahead, the final thing to be discussed with regard to the flap is about diffuse lamellar keratitis. This is again an important thing, and the main thing to look at here is it is something we have to be anticipating within the first week of post-LASIK. It is something like an infiltrate kind of an appearance or that appears from the periphery and starts growing into the center. This is again seen in the interface between the flap as well as the cornea. And one thing to be sure about here is whether is this patient having an SPK, because it very much looks like an SPK. You hope you guys know it. It is punctate epithelial keratitis, punctate kind of lesions that you see over the corneal surface. How do we differentiate between a DLK and a punctate epithelial keratitis is you can do a fluorescent stain. If the patient is taking up the stain, then we are dealing with an SPK here. If it is not, in a post-LASIK patient, it is just been 1 week after the surgery, we are mostly looking at DLK or diffuse lamellar keratitis or sands of Sahara. Now these are having grades. So if it is very much closer to the margins of the flap, we are in stage 1. If it has completely covered up the flap, then this is in stage 2. So that's the main difference between stage 1 and 2. If it is only in one particular quadrant of the cornea, we are looking at 1. If it is in throughout the cornea, it is 2. Now, when do you say this is stage 3? Stage 3 is when the central pupillary area is being covered with diffuse discrete lesions. Then we call this as the stage 3. Stage 4 is very rare. I have never seen it. That is when we have not managed the stage 3 well, it can go in for a scarring that is towards the center of the pupillary area. Now this area, this is a point of no return. You can't do much to make the patient happy here. But until stage 3, we do or we can manage it very well. Now, how do we usually go about with it? Is if it is only in stage 1, we don't do much. If it is only affecting the periphery of the area, then we don't have to be much worried about. We have to make sure that we follow up the patient every day, right? From usually it appears on the 2nd or the 3rd day after LASIK, and we make sure that the patient has called at least on alternate days. If you feel that it is managing only in the periphery, it will just go off on day 10. No worries here. But if you feel, yes, it is coming into the center of the cornea on day 4 or day 5, then we may have to start the patient on some surface acting steroids like fluoromethalone or loteprednol, or something we usually give here, that is surface acting steroids. These are giving a good response on the surface of the cornea. Now, if it has gone into the stage 3, or if you feel the central part of the cornea is very much involved with diffuse immune infiltrates, then we will have to start the patient on something stronger steroid, that is prednisolone. So that's about DLK. Any doubts from here on this? Anybody with personal experience or in any of your patients or anyone you have seen?
Doctor, I want to ask how you would differentiate this with viral keratitis.
Yeah, viral keratitis is something which will be very much localized to one particular area. It will not be showing us that multiple diffuse appearance all throughout. Just like I said, it will not be involving all the area. It will be usually sectoral. And if you have waited for some time and if it's a little too late, let's say, then we can see vascularization that is getting infiltrated in. And another thing is the pain.
Thank you.
I hope it's clear. Yeah. Because in viral, that's a very good question to ask, because in viral, you are not supposed to be giving the patient a steroid there unless and until if you are sure that it's deep in or it's like an immune response, like in disciform keratitis. Otherwise, if you're dealing with a viral keratitis that has been activated post LASIK, that is with the dendritic patterns are appearing on the surface, then we should never be touching on steroids here. So it's a very good question to ask. Thanks, Logan. Yeah. So I'm moving on to the next. So far we were discussing the flap related problems. Now we will discuss a bit about the microkeratome. Microkeratome means something, it's what we use during the LASIK. So just like as I said, we have free cap, we have irregular thickness flap, we have buttonholes, flap can get torn or it can be an incomplete flap. So how do we deal with it? So few key things I would like to highlight here is, usually this microkeratome associated problems occur mainly either because of the cornea. Cornea means, as I said, it could be a very steep cornea or it could be a very flat cornea that we are doing the LASIK on. That is when these microkeratome related complications usually occur. Or else, if you are dealing with a patient who's having a very narrow interpalpebral aperture, because you know that in microkeratome you have to keep a ring that is bigger than the limbus to make sure or to stabilize the eye, and then we pass the microkeratome all along. So the stabilization will be very difficult when the interpalpebral aperture is very small. So for the blade to pass through, we need quite a decent interpalpebral aperture. So that is another thing we have to be very careful about, or we should be anticipating when you're doing a LASIK. Next is during your procedure, because of the these two reasons, or you are not very careful when you had kept the ring, you can get a suction related problem, or the ring that you have kept for the microkeratome to move ahead slipped away from one of its ends, and then also you can get these kinds of complications. So to start up with, how do you manage a case of free flap? Just like the name suggests, the flap is not having a hinge. The hinge has been cut off with the microkeratome. So in that manner, you are dealing with a free flap here. So as I said, if you anticipate, okay, this is a very flat cornea, the corneal curvature is less than 42, it will be ideal to give a irregular marking. Just like in this patient, before you cut, we usually do markings on the corneal surface, so we can make sure to know that which is the superior end, because once this is off, you don't know which is the inferior part, which is the superior part, because to replace it, we should know that. So before you cut itself, if you have made a mark like this that is a little asymmetrical, then if it is a free flap, you can see the same mark. Okay, this end is having 2 marks, that means this has to be the superior end and this has to be the inferior end. So it's no harm here. We can easily just ensure that they are opposing each other when you are keeping the flap back. So now the question is Logan.
Yes.
Yeah, let's say you are the person who's doing the LASIK and you happen to be having a free flap here. Will you go ahead and treat the patient or will you not? What I meant to ask is, will you ablate the patient or not?
We will ablate the patient.
Yeah, good. So here actually, why is so? Because it's not a major complication here. You can proceed on with the procedure here. We can just, this is just like you are opening up the flap. You can just displace it and do the ablation and place it back. But here, as I said, when you're placing it back, you have to make sure the inferior has been kept inferior and the superior part has been very well placed or aligned well. And why? Because if you have not placed it well, there are high chances for the epithelial ingrowth, post-LASIK epithelial ingrowth can occur easily in these kind of patients if you have not opposed it well in the orientation. So we can ablate, but let's say if you are not confident it's in your early practice, then it's best not to. You can reposition it back again and abort the procedure, and you can wait for 3 months and then come back and do a not LASIK. You can think about doing a PRK here. Now, coming to the next complication with regard to microkeratome is buttonholing. Buttonholing, it is opposite to free flap. Free flap, as I said, we usually see it in flat corneas. Buttonholing is something we see in steeper corneas. Here, what happens is, instead of cutting it at the right plane, for some reason, we are cutting only the peak of the flap. So when you're looking at a flap, it will appear as if it is having a hole at the center. And this part of the flap would be on the corneal surface here. So it's just like a donut being taken up from the corneal in the form of a flap. So Aarti, how will you manage this patient? Yeah, Deepti, would you want to give it a try?
I don't know, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Wash?
Yes, sir. I think in this case, we will proceed with, we will complete our procedure. At the end, we will apply the bandage contact lens and we will observe the patient closely.
Okay, that means we will ablate the cornea. Means we will treat, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So see, the problem here is that island of corneal flap that is still at the center.
Ablate the patient. will have to abort.
Yeah, so this is the problem. This central island of flap that has remained on the corneal surface is the problem here. So if you ablate, the problem is the laser is going to come over it. So here you will get the right correction, but at the center, that is the most important part of the visual axis, will not be corrected in the right manner. So here the answer has to be, if it is a buttonholing I'm dealing with, I will abort my procedure. I will reposition the flap back again. I will apply bandage lens. I will postpone my procedure for around 3 months. I will ensure the refractive error has stabilized. And then I will not be repeating the patient with a LASIK. It's most safe. There are surgeons who do LASIK on the same patient back again. But as a student, when you're answering to an examiner, you can say that we would prefer to do a surface procedure like PRK, or even femto is something that you can say. But my protocol would be, if I was in your position, or if I was the candidate, I would say that I will do a PRK because it's safer. You can just debride the epithelium with alcohol or with a hockey stick, and you can just ablate, apply mitomycin, and then place a bandage contact lens. So it will be much safer to say that we will repeat the procedure by doing a PRK. We will not go ahead for LASIK here. I hope it's clear. Any doubts?
Yeah, that means preferably we should abort the procedure.
Yeah, we have to. If it's buttonhole, abort. If it's free flap, it depends on how confident you are. You can, there is no harm in going ahead and ablating, but you have to make sure that the cornea has been replaced in the right orientation with superior and inferior, because epithelial ingrowth is something we are worried of.
Or otherwise, we can go ahead with the PRK.
Yeah, in button, otherwise in free flap, if you are not confident, you are not treated the patient, you can place the free flap back again, wait for 3 months, let epithelium grow over it easily, ensure, and during that time there is no epithelial ingrowth, wait for 3 months, then you can again in this patient also think about doing a PRK.
Oh.
Okay. Now the next flap related complication would be a incomplete flap. What do I mean by an incomplete flap here? Incomplete flap means I have opened up the flap, but for some reason the blade did not move all around. It stopped here. So I'm only able to lift this much of the flap. Sometimes it will stop here. So the flap that can be lifted is only up to this mark. Sometimes it covers up 2/3 of the cornea and stops maybe 1/3 short of the flap. So here, how do we manage? Here, up to the 2/3, it's safer to abort the procedure. But let's say if the flap has been opened 2/3 of its length, and if you feel that the ablation usually is, though our flap size is around 8.5 or 7.5 to 8.5, the area we treat is only 6 or 6 to 6.5 optic zone is what we treat. So if you feel that the optic zone has been freed up and it is an incomplete flap, then you can go ahead and treat the patient. But during exam, they won't usually ask you about incomplete LASIK flaps. The most common questions they usually ask is about the free flaps as well as the buttonholes. But just to be out of interest, to complete the session, I think you should also be knowing how the incomplete flap has to be managed. So up to the 2/3 has been opened up, then you can go ahead if the optic zone, the terms have to be very clear here. The optic zone is the area that we treat at the center of the cornea. So if that has been cleaned up, then we can do the treatment. If it has been partially exposed, then it's best to abort the procedure. Same, just like we did in buttonhole, reposition it, place the BCL, postpone it for 3 months, and it's much safe to do a PRK in this patient. And little bit about the femto-LASIK. You should see femto-LASIK, if you ask me, it's the safest to consider. The complications, whatever I discussed in microkeratome LASIK, like with regard to flap, everything can also be seen in femto-LASIK. But the possibilities are much less because it's the precision of the cut that we take up in femto-LASIK. The only thing they may ask you about in femto-LASIK is usually about what is opaque bubble layer. Well, this is actually a air bubble that when you do the docking and we do the cut of the flap. Here we are not using a microkeratome. You know that it is femto laser that we are using to do that cut. When we are doing that cut with the femto laser, what happens is when the flap has been formed, some kind of air bubbles do appear at the center at the interface between the flap and the residual stromal bed. So in that position, we are in a dilemma whether can I proceed on and shift the patient to the excimer laser and go ahead with the treatment. So here the best thing you can answer in the exam is, if it is an opaque bubble layer, I will wait for some time. When we wait, the bubbles usually disappear. Then I will shift the patient to the excimer laser and treat it. So you need not have to abort here. You don't have to discontinue your treatment. You don't have to get panicked. The only thing is you wait for some time for the air to disappear, and then you can go ahead and do the excimer laser. The next two complications you should be knowing about. It's very rare again. That is vertical gas breakthrough. That is called as VGB. That is also very rare. It is during the formation of the flap, you get something like a buttonholing. Just like we discussed in LASIK, part of it opens up and the part of the flap remains on the corneal surface. This is just like a buttonhole. So here, as we did in LASIK, we will just abort the procedure. We will not proceed on. And also, if you feel that your suction is not coming up easily, this can happen in steep corneas or flat corneas also. So in those cases also, we will abort the procedure. We can think of doing maybe normal microkeratome LASIK or PRK in these patients. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, in incomplete flap,
yeah,
you said if it is 2/3 incomplete flap, can you repeat it?
Yeah, okay. So this is the area. So see, what do we do in LASIK is we open up a flap that is usually around, let's say from here, let's say it is 8 millimeters. 8 millimeters is the size of the flap that we are planning in this patient. Though the flap is large, that it is around 8 millimeters, the area we usually treat is related to the pupillary center. We are only treating 6.5 millimeters max, or in some cases it is just 6. We can adjust in the machine. Only the central 6 millimeter zone has to be treated. Give me a second. Fasil? Okay. Sure. Yeah, sorry. So in this patient, let's say the flap that we have created is 8, and we know that we haven't got a complete flap. So we can give it to the minimum required. So let's say we are planning here to treat only the central 6 millimeters. So what I'm trying to say here is, if the flap has opened up this much, it need not be 8. If it has at least reached or given you a 7 millimeters to this end, then your optic zone is free. Then you can go ahead and treat this. So that's what I meant by, if the 2/3 of the flap can be lifted, at least this much of the flap can be easily lifted, you can proceed with your LASIK. But if it is less than 2/3, that means I am only able to lift the flap up to this much. This much of the flap is adherent to the cornea. I'm only able to lift half of the flap. In that cases, you cannot proceed with the ablation, because you are going to harm the corneal surface. So we abort the procedure. We don't go ahead with the treatment. I hope it's clear.
Yes, now it's clear, because if it is half, if the flap is lifted half, that means it must be coming in the optical zone that needs to be treated with laser.
And your ablation, the optic zone will not be exposed completely.
Yes.
But if it is extending further on to up to 2/3 of its required diameter, then we can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Very
One-
well elaborated.
Thank you.
One question to the participants. In such case of a partial flap, when it is stopped in between, in the middle, would you suggest to do a second cut at the same time? Pass the microkeratome once again. Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Logan, you want to take up? Or Dr. Wash?
Yes, someone is asking about that. If flap is incomplete, can we reapply the microkeratome?
Yeah, microkeratome back again. Can you? It is Dr. Swadik who's asking the question. So will you be able to? Will you go ahead and repeat this?
Yeah, I think we cannot reapply the microkeratome.
Yeah, we should not. We should not reattempt. Any doubts from your end? Others?
Doctor, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes. Dr. Wash?
Yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah, Dr. Wash, you can ask first.
Yeah. So my question is that whenever we have a case of epithelial ingrowth in case of LASIK, so in femto-LASIK or LASIK, so whenever we have a case of this epithelial ingrowth in SMILE, so how we will manage the case of epithelial growth in case of SMILE?
Yeah, see, here you will have, it is very rare to get epithelial ingrowth in SMILE because it is just 1 millimeter fine cut with the femto we are doing. Because there is no large area or there is no flap we are erasing here. Just like in while we are doing phaco, maybe maximum would be a 2 millimeter incision that you're making here. And you are removing a large area of lenticule through that very small hole. So that will heal up, probably maximum would be 2 days time. So if you ask me, I would say there is no possibility, or 100% there is no possibility that we will be seeing an epithelial ingrowth in a case of femto-LASIK. Sorry, I mean SMILE.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Yeah. Muthuswamy sir?
Have you asked? There are some people who have not even opened their mouth, Sajay. You see, the important thing is, I repeat, I want you to ask the questions and make all the mistakes as possible here. They're just keeping quiet. Is it? Keep quiet. This is equal to just reading your textbook. If you ask, you are going to go back to some experience. Okay?